The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody. This is Pam Eliason with the Toxics Use Reduction Institute. Thank you for joining the webinar. We are going to wait until 12:02 to actually initiate the webinar. So hang on and we'll be with you shortly. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar. My name is Pam Eliason. I'm the training manager here at the Toxics Use Reduction Institute. This is the third in a series of webinars that we've been presenting that really address various aspects of toxics use reduction planning. So I want to just remind folks we have everybody on mute during the presentation. If you have a question, please type that question in your question box, and I will be monitoring the questions. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation, unless there's something that really needs to be addressed immediately. But you will be on mute, so please do type in your questions in the question area of your chat box. And I will be making sure that those questions get posed to our speakers today. If you are a toxics use reduction planner, please know that you will be required to complete the survey that will be directed your way immediately after the webinar. And once we get the results of those questions, the results of the survey quiz, we will be able to share the information with the Department of Environmental Protection, who approves continuing education credit. There are slides available on our handouts section of your chat box. We will probably be modifying that a bit afterwards, so would prefer that you hold off on getting those slides, but if you'd like to pull out the slides and have them now, that's fine as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Rachel Massey. Rachel is Turi's Senior Policy Analyst and has been deeply involved in the process of understanding what the hazards are associated with artificial turf, along with her colleague, Joy Onasch, who is our Business and Industry Manager here at Turi. So without further ado, Rachel, I hand it to you.
Great, thank you very much. So again, I'm Rachel Massey, and I will be presenting work that Joy Onasch and I have completed together. I'll be doing the presentation, but Joy may jump in along the way or help to answer questions at the end. Just to give you a little overview of what we're going to cover, we'll just give you a very quick background on the Massachusetts Toxics Use Reduction Act, and then a little bit of background on the relationship between tire crumb and sports turf. And then we'll share some of the work that we've been doing to understand better the alternatives related to sports turf. So that'll include some information on artificial turf components, heat, injuries, costs, and then information on natural grass. And we'll wrap up with some information on Turi resources that you might find useful. So just some background, the Massachusetts Toxics Use Reduction Act was enacted in 1989. It is a law that is designed to help Massachusetts companies and communities reduce their use of toxic chemicals while promoting the competitive advantage of Massachusetts businesses. It's implemented by 3 entities working together: the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, or MassDEP, the Massachusetts Office of Technical Assistance and Technology, or OTA, and the Massachusetts Toxics Use Reduction Institute, or TURI. That's where we are. And TURI has a range of projects. We do training, we provide small grants to small and large businesses and communities, we sponsor research, we do alternatives assessment, and a variety of other activities. All the work that we do is centered around the concept of toxics use reduction. And this has several elements. One is a focus on inherent hazard. So if a chemical is a carcinogen or a neurotoxicant, for example, then the toxics use reduction approach is to find ways to reduce or eliminate the use of that toxic chemical as a means to protect human health and the environment. And part of that work is to assess alternatives and work to avoid regrettable substitutions. That would be a situation where you might switch from a chemical that is well known to be hazardous to something else that is maybe less well understood but also hazardous. We try to do research to avoid those situations. And in all of this work, we are always looking for efficiencies and cost-saving opportunities. And our experience with the Massachusetts businesses that we work with is that often there are opportunities both to reduce toxics and to find cost savings. So how did TURI get involved in looking into issues related to sports fields? It came from 2 strands of our work. One is that for a number of years, we've worked to support communities that are introducing organic grass management, and that's included work with homeowners on their lawns and work on public lands and work on sports fields. And then the other strand is that in recent years, we've increasingly been getting questions from municipalities and universities and others as they're trying to make decisions about their sports fields. And so in an effort to answer those questions that we were getting, we decided to take this alternatives assessment lens. And essentially that's taking a systematic approach to looking at alternatives, considering hazard as well as technical feasibility and costs. And we haven't done a full formal alternatives assessment for sports turf, but we've used that approach to try to gather some insights on the topic. So a little bit of background: what do waste tires have to do with sports turf, or how do these 2 things get to be connected? So I think it starts with some background on tires. Tires can be a challenging material to work with. Tires are a vulcanized rubber product. This is a material that can be melted and then formed into a shape. And once it's formed into a shape, it's cured with a chemical cross-linking process. So after it's cured, it can't be melted again. And so it's difficult just to create a closed loop system to recycle tires. Used tire material can be used to make new tire, can be used in the manufacture of new tires, a certain percentage of it, and tire life can be extended through retreading, but it's not a simple material to deal with. And then tires are also a challenging material as waste. When whole tires are landfilled, they can float to the top of a landfill, creating some space problems. If tires catch fire, the fires can be very difficult to extinguish, and they can leach toxic substances. So as a result, there are significant quantities of waste tire material, and there's a question of where those wastes end up. And I've put some statistics on this slide for 2015. So these are for tires that were taken out of use in that year in the US. So about half ended up as tire-derived fuel, and then about a quarter became ground rubber, and then there were other uses as well. And then a little background on synthetic turf. Synthetic turf has been marketed since the 1960s, but it was originally just a synthetic carpet that didn't have an infill. And it went through various generations, redesign, and in the 1990s, a sand and rubber infill was introduced. And that's now one of the important uses of tire crumbs. So you saw the statistics in the previous slide about a quarter of waste tires going into tire crumb. So then looking in more detail at where the tire crumb goes, in 2015, about a quarter of that was used for sports surfaces, and almost another quarter was used for either playgrounds or mulch applications. Some of the other things to think about with synthetic turf, it's got various elements. There's a bottom drainage layer. There is a backing material with fibers or synthetic grass blades attached to it. And often there's some kind of shock absorption pad, not in all cases, and then there's infill. And I want to note that all of the materials that are used in the turf are worthy of research. And we've kind of delved into the details on the infill because we've gotten a lot of questions about infill, but it is definitely important to look at the other materials as well. And some of the considerations are, what's the material composition, what's in it, what are the chemicals that are most likely to be released from those materials, particle migration, where do those materials go? They don't all stay in the field. So this slide shows you a list of some of these infill materials. I may not have everything listed here, but these are some of the important ones. So there are synthetic infills, there are mineral or plant-based infills, and there are combinations, and I'll go into more detail on those. A few useful concepts as you're learning about this topic. One is that there are often multiple materials in a single category. So for example, thermoplastic elastomer can include a variety of materials. Another is that many of these materials contain quite a lot of additives. Those can include cross-linking agents, accelerators, stabilizers, plasticizers, fillers, antimicrobials. And so if you're learning about an infill, sort of finding out the name of the polymer may be a first step, but then there are additional steps to find out more about what is present in it. And then some terminology that can be useful as you get into the details is thermosets versus thermoplastics. So thermosets are materials that are cured and that can't be melted and then reformed, whereas thermoplastics can be melted and reshaped. Other useful concepts are just to understand the potential routes of exposure, and I just took these graphics from a fact sheet from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. So there you can be exposed through breathing, through skin absorption, or through ingestion. So these are all angles that you want to think about. So a little bit of information about tire crumb infill. EPA has identified just over 350 chemicals or chemical categories that are discussed in existing literature on tire crumb. And it's important to understand that the presence and amount of a given chemical can vary depending on the sample you're looking at or the field that you're looking at. So it's not standardized necessarily. And on this slide, I've just showed some of the categories of chemicals that may be of interest, and I followed the categorization that was set up by EPA. So there are metals, lead and zinc are among the ones that are of particular concern. There are volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, such as benzene, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. I gave some examples here, such as benzoanthracene, phthalates, which are plasticizers, and other materials such as rubber curing agents. And then what are the health and environmental endpoints that people think about? Well, they include carcinogenicity, so some of those volatile organic compounds and polyaromatic hydrocarbons are either known or suspected carcinogens. Neurotoxicity, lead is the best known of the neurotoxicants there on that list. Endocrine disruption, if you're not already familiar with the concept of endocrine disruption, an endocrine disruptor is a chemical either that behaves like a hormone in the body or somehow disrupts the action of hormones. So the phthalates would be examples, or nonylphenols, other chemicals that we'll maybe get to on another slide. And then aquatic toxicity is another of the concerns. If you're kind of new to this topic, you may frequently hear that there have been a lot of studies that have been done on tire crumb. And it is true that there have been quite a lot of studies, but it's important to understand what those studies are and what they are not. So there are quite a few studies that are materials characterization, finding out what's in the material. To a limited extent, there's a little bit of exposure information, but not a lot of exposure information is available yet, although several studies are in process. And then there are quite a few risk assessments, and a risk assessment is a study where you take information that's available and add a number of assumptions to develop an estimate of number of disease cases that could result from an exposure. And finally, there are no epidemiological studies to date. So, for example, an epidemiological study could be a study where you look at a group of people who have a certain exposure and then follow them to learn about their disease outcomes, or take a group of people with a certain disease outcome and look retrospectively at their exposures. And these studies are time-consuming and expensive to conduct, but it's important to understand that those are currently absent. There is some excellent ongoing research. The three federal agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry have been working together on a study to answer some of the unanswered questions about tire crumb, and I've just listed their websites. I encourage you to take a look. The California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment is also working on answering some unanswered questions about tire crumb hazards and exposure. There's also work occurring in Europe, and one example that I mention here is the Center for Safety of Substances and Products in the Netherlands is developing a restriction proposal under the European REACH regulation, which would restrict levels of PAHs in performance infill in sports turf. So that may be an interesting topic for some of you to learn more about. Okay, so what do we know about the other infills? And so we tried to take a detailed look at some of these, and you can look on our website for more information. So one is EPDM rubber, or ethylene propylene diene terpolymer. One of the characteristics of EPDM is that it can be mixed with high levels of additives and oils, so it can tolerate as much as a 50-50 mix with these additives while retaining its performance properties. There was one study that compared tire crumb with EPDM, and that study found lower levels of hazardous substances in the EPDM except for chromium and zinc. So it had higher levels of chromium and similar levels of zinc. Both the chromium and zinc were above sensitive land use standards, according to this study. And it had lower levels of PAHs, phthalates, and phenols, and lower levels of lead, and no PCBs. This slide gives you more detail on what that study found. So if you just look at the top line, the PAHs, you can see for the what they refer to here as the recycled rubber granulate, so it was a tire crumb, that they detected 16 PAHs, whereas in the EPDM they detected 5, and the total PAH levels were lower. So anyway, this is some detailed comparison information. Another material is TPE, or thermoplastic elastomer. This is a broad category that can describe multiple materials. There was a study that compared 2 tire crumb fields with 1 TPE field. They were all indoor fields, but the findings are still useful. This study found that there were no vulcanization compounds, preservative compounds, or carbon black at the TPE fields, although they were present at the tire crumb fields. Total volatile organic compounds were very high to high at the tire crumb fields and were slightly elevated at the TPE fields. PAHs were present in all the fields but lower at the TPE field. And so overall, the researchers found that in general, the chemicals of concern were at lower levels in the TPE field, but they weren't able to make a broad recommendation about TPE infill because they didn't know what other chemicals might be present. Another material is waste athletic shoe materials. So this can contain a variety of synthetic rubbers as well as natural rubber. Like other cured rubber products, it can contain vulcanizing agents, antioxidants, colorants, stabilizers, and plasticizers. Most of the manufacturers of athletic shoes do have a restricted substance list, or RSL, so that does provide some guarantee that certain substances are guaranteed to not be in the material, but there can be a variety of other materials there. And there is some literature on potential allergic reactions to additives used in shoe rubber. So there's a literature on shoe-related dermatitis, and that just may be something to look into further. Yet another option on the market is acrylic-coated sand. So this includes sand, a proprietary acrylic, a pigment, and then an antimicrobial. And the antimicrobial is a Microban, which is a trade name for a range of antimicrobials. This is likely to include triclosan and triclocarban. So I've just included triclosan here as an example. Triclosan is persistent and bioaccumulative and presents a range of concerns related to human toxicity as well as ecotoxicity. One of the things that we learned in an experience with one Massachusetts municipality is this municipality decided to purchase the acrylic-coated sand product, but they were able to request it without the antimicrobial. So they were at least able to eliminate that concern about that persistent and bioaccumulative chemical. There are also plant-based infills. So these can be made with a mix of cork and coconut hulls. Sometimes they're made with walnut shells. In some cases, they may be combined with zeolite. And so some of the questions that we have about these include whether there may be some respiratory hazards. Zeolite can be a respiratory hazard, and there is some literature on respiratory disease among workers exposed to cork dust. So I don't know whether that is relevant for this setting, but these are some questions that may be worth looking into. So now I'll just shift gears and say a little bit about heat. And our focus here at Turi is primarily on chemicals, but I do think that anybody who is looking into this issue should be sure to understand the heat-related aspect. And it's important to understand that all artificial turf does get hotter than natural grass. So I've got a few sort of example temperatures here. A case of a field being 156 degrees Fahrenheit under direct sunlight, or 200 degrees Fahrenheit on a 98-degree day. The choice of infill type can lead to some variation in the amount of excess heat, but the heat is trapped by the artificial grass fibers. So it's an issue in all these products as far as we've been able to determine. And frequent heavy irrigation can help to control heat to a limited extent, but it bounces back pretty quickly. So what the experts on children's health are conveying on this topic is that it's really essential for coaches and other decision makers to be fully educated about heat-related hazards. So there are concerns about burns and also about heat-related illness. And so it's important for decision makers to understand when they may need to either limit or cancel play due to heat, and to understand how to respond to heat-related illness, which can be lethal. We also looked at the literature on injuries. There's kind of mixed evidence on the variety of types of injuries that can occur on grass fields versus artificial turf fields. One thing that is really clear is that there's a higher incidence of skin abrasions on artificial turf fields, and so that means it's very important to be vigilant about skin infections. Other considerations that we haven't gone into here in detail include particle migration, as I mentioned earlier, wildlife and green space impacts. So artificial turf is colored green, but it's not green space in the sense in which that is generally understood. Ecosystem services such as water filtration and use of biocides. So most of these field products have a specification that they should be treated with a disinfectant on a regular basis. So that's another potential source of chemical exposures. And I think maybe the most important thing to understand from our kind of review of the infills is that there is a lack of full information on the material composition, and that makes it very difficult for municipalities and others to make fully informed decisions about what they may be purchasing. We've gotten questions about safer play on artificial surfaces, and that's not, we haven't developed our own information on this, but I just took some information from a fact sheet from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine, tips for safer play on artificial surfaces. So these include avoid use on very hot days, clean cuts and abrasions immediately, wash hands before eating, drinking, or adjusting a mouth guard, and other recommendations. So from Turi's perspective, natural grass is a safer alternative to artificial turf. And the communities that we work with have been working to develop organically managed grass whenever they can. One of the pieces of research that we've done is we've looked at cost scenarios comparing artificial turf with natural grass. And the bottom line is that in nearly all scenarios, the life cycle cost of synthetic turf is higher than that of natural grass for an equivalent area. So for synthetic turf, you've got costs related to installation, maintenance over time, and then disposal, landfilling, and replacement. Whereas for natural grass, you may have an installation cost initially if you're creating a new field. In other cases, there isn't an installation cost, and then you've got maintenance over time. Some of the elements of maintenance for artificial turf, that can include fluffing, redistributing, shock testing the infill, doing periodic static control, disinfection, other activities. For natural grass, it includes irrigation, mowing, fertilizing, replacing sod. And we have quite a lot of detailed cost information on this on our website if you're interested in more. As I mentioned, Turi has been supporting a variety of organic land care projects over the years. This has included projects with homeowners switching to organic for their lawns, municipal land, sports fields, and so on. And one of the projects that we've done is we worked with the city of Springfield, which converted many of their publicly managed lands to organic management. And they did this with support from Chip Osborne of Osborne Organics. And so Chip was kind enough to provide me with some updated figures, which I'm sharing with you here. So in the first year, their cost was around $1,700 per acre to start this organic conversion. In the second year, it dropped to around $1,200 per acre, and in the third year, around $1,100 per acre. So basically, when you do organic management of grass, you're building soil health and building a healthy root system, so the costs of maintenance go down over time. Chip also provided an estimate for what it would have looked like if Springfield had done an even more aggressive program, and there it would have been around $2,000 per acre in year 1 and would have dropped to around $1,300 per acre in year 3. And then one of the things that everybody wants to know is how many hours per year can you play on these organically managed grass fields. So these are some estimates for what's happening in Springfield currently. They have 650 scheduled hours annually. On top of that, they have physical education classes, and then they have about 100 hours of non-programmed use. So according to Chip's estimate, it comes out to nearly 1,000 hours per year. Another example of a community that we're working with currently is a group called the Field Fund in Martha's Vineyard, and they began investing in organic management of some school and town fields in 2017. So they started doing a number of things: soil testing, aeration, overseeding, and other activities. And what they have found is that in that relatively short time, they've had significant improvements at all the fields, and they wanted me to note in particular that they haven't ever had to take the fields offline for any period of time. So just to wrap up with some information about Turi's resources, we have a number of resources on our website, and the URL is there on the slide, www.turi.org/artificialturf. We have a 4-page fact sheet kind of covering the basics, and then we have detailed documents on costs, on physical and biological hazards. We have an overview of issues that come up as we've been researching infills, and then we have some individual documents where we go into detail on individual infills. And we are continuing this research, so we'll be continuing to add information to the website as we develop it. And finally, we have a resource guide, which is just a web page that shows additional web links from other organizations that may be useful. We also have a couple of videos, and I do encourage you to take a look at these at the end of the webinar. They're on that same website. One of them is a short video that presents the experience of Springfield in switching to organic grass, and the other is a summary of our research on safer alternatives for athletic fields. Now, this presentation has focused on sports fields, not on playgrounds, but I just wanted to add one slide on playgrounds in case there are people on the call who are interested in this. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has posted some suggested precautions to limit exposure for children playing on playgrounds with recycled tired materials. So these include avoiding mouth contact, avoiding eating or drinking while on the surfaces, and other recommendations. So I encourage you to look at that URL at the bottom of the slide if you'd like more information on that. And I will wrap up there, and I think we have time for questions.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, we most certainly do. I've had a few questions come in, but I want to encourage everybody who's listening in to please go ahead and post any questions you may have. So let me just start with a question here. From an accessibility and cost perspective, it is clear that many decision makers will need to install and manage artificial turf fields as opposed to natural grass, excuse me. Many of us are looking for the best alternative somewhere between natural grass and artificial turf that uses crumb rubber as an infill. What would you say to this person, Rachel?
Well, yes, I think, you know, the first thing is just to be sure that you have accurately analyzed your costs. So over time, the artificial surface is likely to cost more, as I mentioned. And then to the extent that you're considering an alternative infill, I wish that I could tell you which one to choose. And I can't do that at this point. What I can say is that I think you should look carefully at the information on what's in each of those infills and try to choose the ones that have the lowest levels of toxic chemicals. And so you can get some of that information from the material that we've written up and posted on the website, but I would also encourage you to ask the vendor to provide you with test results. And that would be not just test results for metals, but also test results for organic compounds in that infill so that you can make a really informed choice.
Thanks. I have a question here about cost. Did all of the cost information come from Chip Osborne? Have there been any university assessments on this that you're aware of?
The cost information, so in the full cost document that we've posted on our website, we have a review of all the literature we were able to find on costs. And so there's information from industry associations, and we also included some information from individual municipalities. For example, we were able to get some information from the town of Natick on their costs with installation of an artificial field. We have some information from the town of Marblehead. We'll be adding this information from Springfield. But so no, I shared, excuse me, I shared Chip Osborne's cost information here because it's new information that I received recently that goes beyond what we have already posted on our website. But there are quite a few resources. We even included some information from an analysis that was done in Australia, because that was one of the most detailed analyses that did comparisons across different types of fields, including including grass fields that are maintained to a professional level versus grass fields that are maintained to a to sort of a more regular non-professional level.
Great. I want to just backtrack a little bit. One of the listeners offered an option to the question about what is an option between natural grass and crumb rubber. There are options like Playmaster or Grassmaster products offered that are a combination of grass and synthetic turf. Are you familiar with those?
Actually, no, I'm not familiar with those. So it sounds like we should add those to our assessment at some point.
Yeah, terrific. We also, in response to the discussion about the heat associated with the use of synthetic turf, got another product noted, which is called Cool Fill. And the question is, have you heard of this product and do you know what's in it?
I have heard of the product. I have not checked what is in it. I don't know if Joy may have looked at that. So if so, maybe she can jump in. I guess just two things that I would say as you're assessing these products. One is that I do think there are some documented differences among infills where certain infills will give you less of a heat increment than others. But it also is the case, again, that the grass fibers are also trapping heat. So even if you tweak the infill, you're still going to have some challenges related to heat as compared with natural grass.
Yeah, I could just add that we had seen the Cool Fill product online when we were looking at the different alternative infills, and we weren't able to get beyond, just the marketing material that they have on their website. They didn't provide us with information of what exactly their infill option is. It looks like another plastic alternative, just from a visual inspection.
Okay. So, and also on the topic of heating, does the high heating of the artificial turf result in degradation of the turf fibers, infill components, or backing?
Well, I would say all those materials do degrade over time. And so factors influencing degradation would most likely include both level of use and environmental conditions. But they definitely do degrade over time, which is why they eventually have to be disposed of and replaced. And that often means landfilling those materials.
And just anecdotally, we've heard from towns that their fields don't last nearly as long as the folks putting in the fields, had claimed they would last for them.
So this kind of speaks to one of the questions that came up, which was, are there any life cycle comparisons between infills and also recycled versus virgin plastic in the big picture?
Let's see, life cycle comparisons between infills. So I guess that's a question about whether there's a comparison in terms of how long they last.
And also whether or not they contain recycled or virgin materials.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's see. So you definitely can readily see from the marketing materials which ones are virgin materials and which ones are recycled. I think the important thing to understand when you're looking at the recycled materials is that in most cases you're essentially delaying the route to the landfill or the route to final disposal. So it's not a closed loop system. It's basically a delay of disposal of the materials. At least that's the case with the tire crumb. So yeah, it's possible that there is an infill product that can be indefinitely recycled. But most of the recycling that I've seen is not a closed loop. It's getting used on the field and then disposed of.
Yes, and there was sort of a follow-up question, which is what is the recycling infrastructure available for artificial turf? It should be recyclable, but the question is how much of an infrastructure is there to actually manage such a thing?
Yeah. Well, this is a great question, and this is generating lots of things that maybe we should look into in the future. I don't know much about the infrastructure for recycling. Again, I would say to my knowledge, the tire crumb coming out of a field is not likely to be headed for further recycling. But I'm not sure whether there may be some infills that do get further recycled over time.
Great. Can you speak to the trade-offs involved with reducing the demand for recycled crumb rubber the prospect of other forms of pollution, tire fires, etc.? What are those other things that we need to be aware of as we look at them?
Right. Well, again, it's a great question, and again, it is a difficult material to deal with. It's a difficult material to find appropriate uses for. I think a couple of themes that I would keep in mind in thinking about this. One is ideally we should try to maximize the extent to which we extend tire life and use recycled materials in some way in that tire life cycle. So trying to sort of head towards a closed loop to the extent that it's technically feasible. And then the other theme is, to the extent that we don't have good ways to dispose of this material or do true recycling, we want to think about looking for ways to dispose of it that minimize rather than maximizing human and environmental exposure. So use in a playground or on a sports field means that you've got a waste material that children are interacting with very, very actively, whereas there may be some other options for stockpiling or reusing these waste materials in some way where you wouldn't have so much direct exposure of children.
Great. And really what you're describing is, this process of evaluating options, that is something that our toxic use reduction planners are very familiar with. And that's really what this whole study has been, is an exercise in evaluation of alternatives and thinking through what those trade-offs might be, thinking through what the life cycle impacts might be, is an important part of any toxic use reduction option evaluation. So this is a great example of that. I have a question here. For facilities that already installed a turf field with crumb rubber, specifically schools that may have installed turf fields using a crumb rubber infill in the past several years, did you come across any literature for how to make the field safer for use? Specifically, she's interested in any modifications that can be made to the field surface or construction instead of best management practices for those using the fields.
Wow, this is another really excellent question. I am afraid I have to say I don't know about modifications, but that's certainly something that I'd like to look into. And I think I think the couple of things that we are aware of is that some schools have posted sort of warning or instruction signs at the fields, letting people know about safer use practices. And some schools eventually, come to a point where they're ready to replace those fields, and then they look at safer alternatives at that point.
Mm-hmm. Great.
But I do, for these great questions that we don't have good answers for, I do encourage you to, follow up with us afterwards, and we can try to help look into these questions further.
Yes, and we will definitely do that. Here's another great comment. I am not a plastic grass proponent, but we have a big city situation where our parks department is acutely aware of playable hours. They are convinced that the synthetic fields offer dramatically greater playable hours and cite the public health benefits of increased exercise opportunities, especially in low-income neighborhoods. Any comments? And then he promises to shut up, but please don't.
Yeah, so playable hours are definitely one of the issues that gets brought up very frequently. I think, I recently listened to a presentation by Chip Osborne, the organic land management expert, and he actually is responsible for managing both a synthetic field and a number of organically managed natural grass fields. And what he said is that he on the one hand does believe that grass fields can can tolerate quite a lot of hours of play, but they are still grass. They're not plastic. And so you're never going to get to the same number of hours because plastic is plastic, rubber is rubber. It's not a living thing. And so you can use it for more hours. Of course, it also then will degrade more quickly. The more you use it, the more kind of beat up it gets, and the more you have to replace the infill and so on. And I guess the other, perspective that I've heard from other public health experts who have spoken on this topic is, at the end of the day, parents are responsible for keeping their children safe, and having your child be in a healthy environment, there may be a little bit of a trade-off between having a healthy play space and having the absolute maximum number of hours. But I guess the other thing I would say, from the experience of, in particular, of Somerville, Massachusetts, which is, a very densely populated town, is that sometimes there is work that can be done to tweak the way the play time is being scheduled. So sometimes there are fields that are being underused and other fields that are being overused, or there are teams that are coming from another town into the highly used area. And if you do some clever management of those schedules, you can sometimes avoid the difficulties that towns have been running into. It's also the case that often towns are doing a comparison between a baseline of a field that is receiving little to no maintenance, a grass field with little to no maintenance, compared with a brand new artificial field. And so the poorly maintained or non-maintained field may not be able to tolerate a lot of playable hours, but if you simply increase some of that maintenance, then you can increase the number of hours for which you can use it. So anyway, that's a few different ideas. I don't know if that helps with your question.
And Rachel, I think if you want to add that anecdote about, it's more than an anecdote of the information about the cost. When you look at the full cost of putting in an artificial field and all the maintenance that actually goes with it, and replacement materials and the life cycle of it all, and including disposal, and when you look at a natural organically managed field, that you could actually, for almost less money, literally replace most of that natural grass sod on a fairly regular basis to keep the fields looking pristine, and still spend less money.
Yeah, thank you for adding that.
Okay. If anybody has any other questions, I encourage you to go ahead and type those in there now. We do have a couple of people who have just wanted to double check. And yes, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website, www.turi.org. You can look under the training folder, the training section of the website, and you'll find continuing education. Within that, all of the past webinars that we have put on all the recordings are available there. And we will have the handout, which are the slides, available as well. So just kind of a final wrap up, perhaps, unless anyone else has any other questions. Again, what we're doing here is we're trying to assess alternatives, looking at, are there safer alternatives to the materials that are commonly being used that we know are a concern for a number of different ways and for a number of different reasons. And we're looking at the technical feasibility of the alternatives. We're looking at the economic feasibility of the alternatives, and we're trying to get a handle on whether or not something is indeed safer. so that's kind of the process that we've been going through here in this study, and I think it's a really nice example of that. I have a comment here. It says, in order to have a natural grass field with fast drainage providing accessibility, an extensive drainage system must be installed. This dramatically increases the cost. In addition, it requires regular replacement of sod, which is also costly. Comments on that?
Yeah, I guess I would just comment on that again, when you think of the range of costs for a natural grass field, one of your options is to do a fully new, a new construction of a field, in which case you can really get a sort of top of the line surface, which would definitely rival whatever you would get if you did a newly installed artificial field. So, for institutions and municipalities that are able to make that investment, that could be a really good way to go, and you could end up with a very well-drained and professional type of field, and that's still going to be cost competitive with artificial turf because you've got that initial installation and you've got maintenance over time, but then you don't have the disposal and replacement cost. And again, we did some of those comparisons in our literature review on costs.
So there's a little bit of back and forth on this whole assessment. There's a comment here that synthetic fields also need to be watered. They need to be cleaned. And so if you're looking at this as a water conservation measure, you need to recognize that that's true, as well as the need for drainage for synthetic turf. That's another thing to just note. Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been a really informative and well done webinar. Thank you, Rachel and Joy, both for all the great work that you're doing. I know that you are both available to have conversations with anyone on this webinar or others about the work that is ongoing. We're certainly interested in learning more, and we've gotten a lot of great ideas here from the people posting questions. So I think
Great,
with that, go on.
Thanks everyone for the excellent questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Rachel and Joy, and look forward to our next webinar, which will be in June, and we'll be looking at alternatives to methylene chloride used in paint stripping applications. So please do stay tuned for that. We've got some exciting work there that we're looking forward to sharing with everybody. So with that, I wish you all a happy day, and keep in touch.
Thank you.